Harry and Meghan gave much more away than they wanted to with their body language and behavior in this Netflix special. All right, let's take a look.
I never saw pictures or videos of a walkabout. It's like, what's a walkabout?
I could talk her through as much as I knew from my own experience and what I'd seen. But the piece I really didn't know about was the style, right? And what a woman needed to, how they needed to dress and all that sort of stuff.
I know you'd be there with the scissors, like as I'm getting ready, like we have 5 minutes. Okay, and I was like, should I wear these earrings? Are these a British designer? I just ordered these online. Is this good? And can you, wait, my tag's still on, like cut the tag. Oh wait,
and then the zip breaks and it's like.
And it's like, okay, do we have safety pin? Sure, safety pin it.
I mean, the whole thing was just ridiculous.
You ready? Yeah, okay.
We just sort of went with it.
They were engaged. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were on their first ever royal walkabout.
As an actress, Meghan Markle is used to the red carpet. She's used to all these crowds. This, however, is something else.
They look perfect, and she was dressed just on point. Yeah.
She looked amazing.
Yeah.
She was delightful. She was lovely.
Everybody was just so excited and pleased and happy. And I think people looked at it and went, wow, what a breath of fresh air.
Good addition to the royal family.
Definitely. Yes.
Like an American.
Go mixed kids.
Yeah, mixed kids in the royal family now.
What a day for Meghan Markle.
There was no doubt who sparkled the most today.
I thought to myself, like, what a dream. I found a woman that not necessarily finds this easy, but is able to do it and make it look easy.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
Right when we're hearing and never saw pictures or a video of a walkabout, maybe she didn't have access to the internet or didn't know how to get online. That could have been the case there. Harry, this whole entire time, looks extremely uncomfortable with her saying this. It looks like he is uncomfortable with that. He's not offering any reassurance to her, and he's looked back to the interviewer here because I think he is in strong disagreement. And when she's talking about her earrings and getting ready, she's trying to make it appear like she's making eye contact with him, but she never really does. Doesn't look at him at all. And when somebody's speaking about someone and they only sort of look in their direction, there's usually two things happening. Number one, there's a desire they will go along with the story. And number two, there's a fear that they're going to see some disagreement on that person's face or some confusion on that person's face. The disagreement on Harry's face here for sure, there's no hint of enjoyment, agreement, happiness, or even nodding while she's going through the story. And I think Meghan's trying to tell this magical sounding story here, but her behavior, her pattern is betraying her because I think she's unable to resist the urge to inject information that vaguely points to her being left out and hurt. And just from Harry's behavior, it seems like he's realizing that a lot of this stuff is kind of fake and he can't back down. There's no getting out of this now. Scott?
All right. She's got that one hand up and she's looking around, giving us the impression of confusion, like she doesn't really understand all this stuff. Now, when she's relaying this confusion and all this discombobulation, we don't see any shoulder shrugs, not even like one little short single shoulder shrug. When you're confused or you don't understand something, quite often you'll do one shoulder shrug or just say, I don't know, and you'll do a shoulder shrug. This isn't, I'm under the impression this isn't real. She's not confused or discombobulated because we don't see any of that. Even when we relay things that we don't believe and we're pretending that we're confused, we should at least do this. And you'll see that quite often when people are pretending to be, I don't know, if they're pretending they don't know, I don't know. You'll see one or both go up, usually both because they don't know just to do one. So that's a little red flag for me right there. Then you're right, Chase. She checks with Harry quite often to make sure he's backing her up on this, to make sure everything's cool. The smile she exhibits, that's a non-Duchenne smile. That means it's not a real smile. We don't see all the proper parts of the facial expression of happiness that let us know that it's real. And I think her concern to make this look natural is what's firing off all these red flags that give us that feeling something's not right here about this. All that aside, I think one thing keeps showing up over and over in Harry's behavior, and he can't quit preening. He's all the time fixing his jacket, fixing his pants, moving around. He's all the time, watch him, every time we see him in public, see him do anything, he can't keep his hands off his jacket. He just keeps fixing it, fluffing it, preening it. So there's that. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, what's a walkabout? Seems to be some bemusement around that. Well, the walkabout was invented by Her Majesty the Queen, his grandmother, when she, in the 1970s, she first went into a crowd as a monarch, was the first to go into a crowd and walk amongst that crowd. So for Meghan, as a student, as somebody who would hold radical female leaders in high regard, I don't know why she doesn't quite understand the history of the walkabout. Of course, her mother, the Queen Mother, did do a walkabout in Canada before that, but she wasn't a monarch at the time. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the first monarch to go into a crowd. Extraordinary breaking of protocol and really engendered the public towards Queen Elizabeth II. Helping people get ready for the events is ridiculous, he says. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's what having a relationship is like. Your partner gets ready in a different way from you. They have different needs that you have. It's ridiculous, but you do it. It's just one of the things that you do. And regardless of whether you are going into a crowd as royalty or not, it's always a little bit ridiculous helping people out for those big events in their life or new events in their life. But you do it. At Chase's wedding, I did Chase's button studs. Why is that a ridiculous thing to do? Yeah, maybe, but you do it. Of course you do it. Of course you do it because it's an honor. Yeah, of course you do it because it's an honor. It's a great thing. I found a woman that, and there's a single shrug there, not necessarily finds this easy, but is able to do it. And then there's a double single shrug, make it look easy. There's three elements of uncertainty in that statement about finding that woman that can do it and makes it look easy, and a little bit of a bitterness at the end of it. I'm not quite sure what that means. We know it's uncertainty. We know there's a certain bitterness around this. We don't know exactly why. We could postulate on that, but I'm sure you can do that as well as we can. So why do you think he's very uncertain about that statement? Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, if you want to know what her Duchesne smile looks like versus her non, when she's telling a story, there's not a lot of Duchesne smile. But when she's walking in front of that crowd, there's a hell of a lot of Duchesne smiling going on. Her eyes are engaged, everything's engaged, her face is alight. So we have a good baseline to compare her back and look and see what's a real smile versus not real. As far as, did I find a woman who could do it? Of course you could, because guess what? All this is entertainment. All of these guys getting out and walking among them. Mark, you may have a different feeling about royals than I do. Of course, I'm an American we're anti-royal as you get. Not anything against the royal family in England. Don't care. Just that we went to war not to have those people in charge of us. So now you have them, and they're more of an entertainment than they are anything else in most people's cases. And him especially, he has no official function at this point. He's just walking around and people want to get to see him, kind of like an act of some kind. That is what she does. Now, if I am an actor and I'm going to play a role, guess what I do? I research that role. Mark has done a lot of that in his life. I would try to figure out what are the things that are acceptable and the things that aren't acceptable. She apparently did not do that. But they're performers, and she's in her element here, and you can see that Duchesne smile. He shows one genuine smile. I'll leave it at this. And that's when he's talking about how she was received. His eyes all alight and all that kind of stuff ties in. And Scott, I agree with you. He is a preener constantly. And I don't think it's preening to look good. I think it's discomfort. And I think that discomfort in front of cameras comes from way back when he was 12.
The eyewitness is you.
I never saw pictures or videos of a walkabout. It's like, what's a walkabout?
I could talk her through as much as I knew from my own experience and what I'd seen. But the piece I really didn't know about was the style, right? And what a woman how they needed to dress and all that sort of stuff.
You know, you'd be there with the scissors, like as I'm getting ready, like we have 5 minutes. Okay. And I was like, should I wear these earrings? Are these a British designer? I just ordered these online. Is this good? And can you, wait, my tag's still on, like cut the tag. Oh wait.
And then the zip breaks and it's like.
And it's like, okay, do we have safety pin? Sure, safety pin it.
I mean, the whole thing was just ridiculous.
You ready? Yeah, okay.
We just sort of went with it.
they were engaged, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were on their first ever royal walkabout.
As an actress, Meghan Markle is used to the red carpet. She's used to all these crowds. This, however, is something else.
They look perfect, and she was dressed just on point. Yeah.
She looks amazing.
Yeah.
She was delightful. She was lovely.
Everybody was just so excited and pleased and happy. And I think people looked at it and went, wow, what a breath of fresh air.
Good addition to the royal family.
Definitely.
Yes. Like an American.
Go mixed kids.
Yeah, mixed kids in the royal family now.
What a day for Meghan Markle.
There was no doubt who sparkled the most today.
I thought to myself, like, what a dream. I found a woman that not necessarily finds this easy, but is able to do it and make it look easy. In this family, sometimes, you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And there is a huge level of unconscious bias. The thing with unconscious bias is it's actually no one's fault. But once it's been pointed out or identified within yourself, you then need to make it right. It's education, it's awareness. And it's a constant work in progress for everybody, including me,
British headline writers have been salivating today. Prince Harry's choice to wear a Nazi uniform earlier this month to a private party has caused outrage. Many are questioning the sensitivity of a 20-year-old prince who chooses to party in a Nazi uniform.
It was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I felt so ashamed afterwards. All I wanted to do was make it right. I sat down and spoke to the chief rabbi in London, which had a profound impact on me. I went to Berlin and spoke to a Holocaust survivor. I could have just ignored it and got on and probably made the same mistakes over and over again in my life. But I learned from that.
All right, I'm going to go first on this one. At the very beginning, we see when he starts talking, he pulls his head in and he tilts it to the right a little bit. And he's got a little bit of eyelid flutter, that really quick little flutter. And then he pauses. Now, you see this quite often when someone is telling you something that they know that they expect that you should know, even though they probably just learned it. They're like, I know what a Bigfoot looks like. You're being smug. You're being like, I know all about that. That's what we're seeing here is him, is smugness with him. And we get this feeling it's so obvious that he wants you to, what he's telling you is so obvious to him, but nobody else, not to regular people. It's just, you should know this. I get the feeling this is just dawned on him or somebody's hip him to it, something like that. So it seems a little bit odd at that point. When he gets specific about bias, we see him being smug again. And then he rotates that hand in the air about 6 times. And he's giving us the impression that there is a lot more going on than we're aware of. We, the regular people, are aware of when he talks about these biases and these problems and these things that are happening. Then after that, it gets kind of weird. He gets a little bit uncomfortable. We see that eyelid flutter and a little tongue jut. And he moves his hand up to his mouth. And then he smells his finger. And they left it in. I would say if I was going to watch that, if they caught me smelling my finger for some reason, I'd say, hey, man, would you mind paying attention and cutting that out? Because I'm smelling my finger over there. Wow. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little less kind. I think the guy has fallen into some new way of... I'll sound like Mark for a minute. This is an archetype. This is an angel fallen from on high who is now going back to attack the institution. This is Lucifer, the angel of light, who becomes Satan. That's what we're facing here. Now, people are going to be harsh on that one, and I don't care, because what I see is you found this star child who is now fallen and who now has the message to go back and attack the institution that is Britain. Regardless of where you fall on the side of the royal family or not, this is what's happening. I think that's more than just him being smug. I think there might be something of a new recognition, and his smugness is because it's a new recognition. You can't possibly know it. For him, it's a new recognition that something happened. And he does some true believer speak there. And guys, I'm not a big fan of any true believer of any kind of thing, and especially when it's coming from some newfound thing. I'm always a little suspicious that they're using language that they've been fed. Then he goes to disdain and disgust in his face, some there, as he talks about it being a constant work in progress for everybody, including me. And then he goes kind of trails off with your fading facts, Scott, when he does it. His eyes break away to internal voice, and he has an increased blink rate. And I'm thinking, okay, why is that he goes heavy swallow, puts his hand over his mouth, and eye blocks? There's something that he's uncomfortable about when he's talking about, oh yeah, it's because he wore a Nazi uniform and now he's preaching the new message. So he has to go out and drink a little pond water for that. And you can see it. And that smelling his finger, I think, is him thinking to put his finger to his mouth and then doing something else. I think if you look at the picture of him as a kid, where his father is there with his back to him, you can see disdain in that kid's face. And I don't know whether that's because he just took a really good ass chewing from Charles, or he really feels remorse. Hard to tell. But this is another pivot point in his life that caused him to have to change something. And I think what we're seeing here is that star child ready to go back at the institution. If you watch this video, you won't see much of these two people. You see a lot of other stuff. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, look, the irony in this is huge, and it's just going to continue as we go through all these videos. Some of the royal family are part of the problem, and there's a direct link there to Princess Michael of Kent. This is Princess Michael of Kent, who was raked over the coals marrying into the royal family because she was Austro-Hungarian, Catholic, and her father was a member of the Nazi Party and a member of the SS cavalry. She was treated, none of which she was responsible for. So, but she was treated harshly, as would be expected by the British press. He puts her forward as part of the problem for the wearing of a brooch. Yes, the wearing of the brooch was a very, very bad thing to do. However, very similar raking over the coals, very similar feeding frenzy, very similar ideas around what religion you can't be, what country you can't come from, what your father or mother cannot be if you're to be royal. So there is an element of irony that he brings up her. It's actually no one's fault, he says. And then the documentary shows something from The Guardian, which says Prince blames royal upbringing and calls others to educate themselves. They don't leave it on long enough for us to really read that. Another example of how this documentary will try and prove a point, but can't actually find the headlines to do it. So they have to flash stuff up really quick. Stop those headlines every time, read them, and you'll be amazed how it's often the opposite of what was just said. But that's the nature of propaganda. The nature of propaganda is somebody says something, and then you give evidence of the exact opposite of that. Now he goes, one of the biggest mistakes of my life, he says. Well, one of the questions would be, what are some of the other big mistakes of your life? That's always a nice, interview question when somebody says, oh, that's one of the biggest mistakes. Great. Thanks for that one. Let's have the others. Sat down and spoke to the chief rabbi in London. So here's his penance. And there's this long, elongated I beforehand. So we know that something is not going to quite fit with this. I sat down and spoke to. So he spoke to. He didn't listen to. He didn't speak with. He spoke to the chief rabbi in London. Two elements there which say, I spoke to the highest status of the kind that I could. Not listen to them at all. A better penance, a better piece of learning would be, I went to a series of lectures from the victims of the Holocaust. That would be a better thing to do than sit down and speak to the chief rabbi in London. He says, I even went to Berlin and talked to Holocaust survivors. Well, there's nothing more special, is there, than going all the way to Berlin to talk to a Holocaust survivor. You could have just stayed in England and talked to many, many, many. In fact, you could have stayed in England and listened to many, 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 many Holocaust survivors who aren't so special that they might be in Berlin or be a chief rabbi that you can talk at. He says, I could have probably ignored it. No, you couldn't have ignored it. It was so big in the press. This element was so big in the press, you absolutely couldn't ignore it. And so therefore, you had to eat it, and you had to go and do some kind of penance, which you're now, in your words, transferring into, actually, they listened to you. That you showed up, you deigned to show up from them. This is terrible linguistics going on here. And so at the end of it all, work in progress for everyone, including me, he says. He doesn't show any of the body language of remorse. He shows concealment, he shows bitterness, and he shows disdain. He got called out, and he's lost his status on that. Don't like that at all. Chase, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I agree. I'll just cover a couple of things y'all didn't cover. Right as the clip starts, you hear the music that's perfectly timed, great music, and you already know. Without even knowing what the clip is about, this morning when I'm watching this video, I was like, oh man, here we go. I knew it, that it was coming. And if you listen, he says, part of the problem, part of the solution. I thought that was interesting that didn't come out right. Just a strange loss of verbal fluency is what I would call that. And he says there's a huge, I think he used the word huge amount of unconscious bias. How would anybody know that there's a huge amount if it's unconscious? And then he says it's a work in progress for everybody, including me, and then he asked for some confirmation there. But he shows some genuine unscripted need for reassurance more than anything. The blink rate right here, which is how often we blink, and typically we blink more often when we're stressed, less often when we're really focused on something. The blink rate goes so high, it's a flutter. Then the eyes move into emotional processing, which means we're thinking about something emotional. We typically move our eyes down and right. And then we have mouth covering there. But then we hear him say, I could have ignored it, but I learned from that. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And this is interesting. And I think they're choosing to only show very, very precise moments of him on camera. And we'll get into that later. But the accentuation here on learned, this might mean there are people who didn't learn or don't learn from these things. And this is the moment where you can denounce anyone who does this. This is the moment where you can denounce Nazis. This is the moment where you can say you hate racism and Nazis are disgusting people. But we don't see it. And I think people were waiting on anything genuine here, and it didn't happen. And if you go back through this whole clip, or maybe even the whole show, you'll notice that there's no information coming out, nothing of substance. Even the admission of wearing the uniform is spoken not by him, by the narrator instead of Harry. So it's a collection of ideas and vague descriptions. And if you do go back through this clip, pay attention to how it's set up. And this is well crafted here because they discuss unconscious bias. It's nobody's fault. It's totally unconscious. It's nobody's fault. Everything's completely unconscious. It's outside of our awareness. Then they talk about the Nazi uniform. So they're setting you up. How do you think they want you to perceive the wearing of this uniform after they tell you everything's unconscious, it's nobody's fault, and people have a lot to learn?
The eyewitness is you.
In this family, sometimes, you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And there is a huge level of unconscious bias. The thing with unconscious bias is it's actually no one's fault. But once it's been pointed out or identified within yourself, you then need to make it right. It's education, it's awareness. And it's a constant work in progress for everybody, including me,
British headline writers have been salivating today. Prince Harry's choice to wear a Nazi uniform earlier this month to a private party has caused outrage. Many are questioning the sensitivity of a 20-year-old prince who chooses to party in a Nazi uniform.
It was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I felt so ashamed afterwards. All I wanted to do was make it right. I sat down and spoke to the chief rabbi in London, which had a profound impact on me. I went to Berlin and spoke to a Holocaust survivor. I could have just ignored it and got on and probably made the same mistakes over and over again in my life. But I learned from that.
Everyone, the Duke and Duchess.
Hi, how are you? Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hi, Tony.
Hi there.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi. How long have you guys been sitting in here for? In silence. Hi, guys. Hello. By the way, happy Veterans Day to you.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
John, hi.
How are we doing?
I'm never going to remember these names, by the way.
We don't know each other.
It feels like speed dating. No, I know, it's so weird.
I'm watching my husband over there. You see how much joy it brings him to be back on a base, and he just immediately goes back into like military banter.
Everybody. And it's amazing how long you all stay on for, because pension's 20 years, right?
Once you get to a certain point, it's like the point of no return. You're like, 12 years-ish, may as well stay now.
No, I signed up for 3, and then they kept dangling the carrot of different options in front of me, and ended up saying 10 years. My 10 years in the army, it gave me the lived experience that other members of my family wouldn't have had. Two tours in Afghanistan, flying Apache helicopters on a military base means that you grow up pretty fast. Geez, I went to war twice. People that I met and the lifelong friends made, that was my second family. Because at that point, there's still scars left open from my mum's awesomeness, to put it mildly.
Well, hopefully she'll be proud. William sent me a letter saying how proud that he reckons she would be. It's one thing that I don't necessarily think about the whole time because I've got the guys to worry about.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so I know this place they're at very well. I spent a lot of years in that part of central Jersey. It's Joint Base. Today it's called Joint Base McGuire-Dix. It's an Army Air Force base. Lots of good things going there. Lots of good soldiers, lots of good airmen come and go there. And want to just shout out whatever words you want to use to good military folks who serve. My notes immediately, I say, what lottery did these guys win to get this opportunity? Did they volunteer or were they voluntold? As Chase and I are very accustomed to, hey, be here on this time and come and do this, and you're going to meet these people. Interesting. You can see the enlisted guys all have their hands under the table. Did you notice that, Chase? Very much an enlisted guy. The other guys may be there because they want to be, and they're trying to pay attention. A lot of these guys' hands are under there. When he says, she goes into, he's talking military banter. I didn't hear any military banter. Chase, you may have heard something I didn't, unless banter has changed. Here's a rich guy talking to you about your retirement options. And then about them dangling things in front of him. I'm like, what could you possibly dangle in? Guys, I'm going to tell you, I'm not doing a lot of body language on this one just because I think it's just the weirdest, most forced conversation I've ever seen. A bunch of military folks sitting around talking to this guy. Now, take nothing away from him. And I'm not going to beat him up because I'm going to also tell you that in my era, being in a war zone was not as dangerous to everybody as it is now because of IEDs and mortar rounds and that kind of thing. A lot of guys who are in green zones and safe areas get injured or killed or worse in today's world. So I'm not taking anything away from anybody who goes to any theater, any way, and serves their country. No, never going to hear me ever beat a guy up for that. I will, however, say that, Chase, you'll talk in just a minute about the guy sitting next to him. A lot of Americans, a lot of other folks in other nations, their soldiers come home and they're broken and they're never the same people and they don't ever fit right back in, and many of them take their own lives. Really, it's a huge, huge problem. So the only reason I mention that is because I think it's important for you to know if somebody's in your life to pay close attention to veterans. It matters. Last thing I'll leave is this. is it me, or did he just wedge in there some kind of way to mention his mother in this video? How do you do that? How do you figure out a way to wedge your mother into a conversation about serving 2 tours in a combat zone? Now, let's leave out all the rest of the details. I'll leave it at that. And Chase, what do you got?
All right. So let's break it down from 2 military perspectives here. I know there were some Navy people in the room there, some Coast Guard, Air Force, everybody.
Yep.
And this mess hall is weirdly, strangely, I've never seen in my life quiet. And I think this made both of them, Harry and Meghan, uncomfortable. And I think the interesting thing about genuine smiles is that they're visible even when somebody's wearing a mask. And at Meghan's table, she's the only person smiling. Nobody seems to even be remotely excited to be there. I was on a deployment. I did 9 tours. I did 9 deployments. And I was on a deployment once, and Tommy Lee, the drummer from Motley Crue, came over. And everybody was excited. We were standing up. We were hugging him, or he was signing albums and stuff. It was a completely different experience. On my deployments, I've met Rihanna, Tom Brokaw, Bill Clinton, and I've never seen a more depressed-looking group of people than this shot. It's strange. And the first thing I noticed, Greg, was what you said, arms under the table. That's unusual. So he says, 10 years gave me the lived experience that other members of my family wouldn't have had. Listen to this sentence again. What experience? Which family? Do you mean experience that you don't have or they don't have? Would have implies that nothing whatsoever is existing in this sentence at all. It's lacking 100% substance there. There's nothing there. And I will say Afghanistan and being an Apache pilot is not a walk in the park. That is a very, very hard job. And Afghanistan is very, very dangerous, mostly unless you're probably a prince. He said he did 2 tours, and he specifically said flying helicopters on a military base, which I think is interesting here. And he says he went to war twice. He did 2 tours, but I know several operators who worked over there, 2 of them that worked with him in very close proximity. He had guards, extreme amounts of protection. Not that this wasn't arduous. He had to have this stuff. He's a high-value target on the Taliban's list, and he would have definitely been what's considered over there a propaganda victory, just capturing or killing him. And at the end here, he's talking about scars. Harry discusses these still open scars. Scars close up. What I think he's referring to are wounds. So when a wound heals, it becomes a scar. So something that happened to you a long time ago and you're fine with it now, that's a scar. Something happened to you a long time ago, it's still pissing you off, that's a wound. So that's open. Just wanted to make that clear. Mark, what do you got?
So first of all, big shout out to the Blues and Royals, big shout out to the Gurkha Regiment, both of which are pictured a lot in that footage. So shout out to them. A shout out to Joanna Lumley, a woman who relentlessly, as a leader got the Gurkhas to be accepted into the SAS. Amazing job that she did as a female leader in that area. What do we see in terms of Harry's leadership here? Well, Simon Sinek said something which was leaders eat last. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's really lovely there to see him served first. I understand why he's being served first. I understand why the server has put down the sandwich rolls in front of him, and there's a lovely the woman next to him's kind of like, oh flipping heck, he's got a sandwich already. We're quite hungry here, having waited forever for these 2 to show up. If it were me, I'm not saying what he should do, but if it were me, I'd have said, you know what, thank you very much, but please get everybody else served before me. I don't see that behavior. I kind of find that interesting. That's all I got on that one. Scott, what do you got?
All right. I'm not going to talk about his body language or him being in the military. I have no idea how that works. My only experience with the military is when I go train them. I know I can tell you exactly what it looks like on the inside, where they dress when they come up for training. I can tell you all about that. But when it comes to anything else, I'm not your guy. So, and I'm sure he did a great job over there and all that. But I'm not going to touch any of that because I have no clue how any of that works. So what I want to talk about is the same thing you guys have been talking about, this crowd of people we're seeing. I've never seen a group any less enthusiastic about seeing anything but that. It's like they said, we're going to watch the movie Norbert. And everybody's like, yeah, you got to watch that. That's the way you'd look if they told you you were going to watch that. And at first, everybody's wearing a mask. And the next thing you know, nobody's wearing a mask except for the waiter that comes over. Thought that was interesting. And when they're introduced, we don't see any posture change. We don't see any lifting up, any excitement. We don't hear anything. Nothing changes. It's just so uncomfortable because she goes, "Hey, everybody." And nobody even looks, I don't feel like. Some are like doing like this, but one guy's sitting there goofing around with his face and then sort of looks over and looks back. Nobody wants to be there. I've never seen a less enthusiastic group of people like this. This is the body language of the unimpressed. That's what we're seeing there. That's a great example of that. All right. Oh, if you don't know who we are, we're the Behavior Panel. And I'm Scott Rouse. I'm a body language expert and analyst, and I train law enforcement and the military in interrogation and body language. And I created the #1 online body language course, Body Language Tactics, with Greg Hartley. Mark?
I'm Mark Bowden. I'm an expert in human behavior and body language, help people all over the world to stand out, win trust, gain credibility every time they communicate, including some of the leaders of the G7. Chase.
Hey, I'm Chase Hughes, did 20 years in the U.S. military, wrote the #1 best-selling book on behavior profiling, influence, and persuasion. You can just type my name into the App Store and get some training on that today. Greg?
Greg Hartley. I'm a former Army interrogator, interrogation instructor, resistance to interrogation instructor. I've written 10 books on body language and behavior, put together the #1 bodylanguagetactics.com course with Scott Rouse. I spend most of my time in business.
The eyewitness is you.
Everyone, the Duke and Duchess.
Hi, how are you? Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hey, sorry,
Hi,
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi. How long have you guys been sitting in here for? In silence. Hey, guys. Hello. By the way, happy Veterans Day to you.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
John, hi.
How are we doing?
I'm never going to remember these names, by the way.
Well, we don't know each other.
It feels like speed dating. No, I know. It's so weird.
I'm watching my husband over there. You see how much joy it brings him to be back on a base, and he just immediately goes back into like military banter.
Everybody. And it's amazing how long you all stay on for, because pension's 20 years, right?
Once you get to a certain point, it's like the point of no return. You're like, 12 years-ish, may as well stay now.
No, I signed up for 3, and then they kept dangling the carrot of different options in front of me and ended up saying 10 years. My 10 years in the Army, it gave me the lived experience that other members of my family wouldn't have had. Two tours in Afghanistan, flying Apache helicopters on a military base means that you grow up pretty fast. Geez, I went to war twice. People that I met and the lifelong friends made, that was my second family. Because at that point, there's still scars left open from my mum's awesomeness, to put it mildly.
Well, hopefully she'll be proud. William sent me a letter saying how proud he reckons she would be. It's one thing that I don't necessarily think about the whole time because I've got the guys to worry about.
Welcome to the very first Royal Foundation Forum. Now, the principle of working together is in the Foundation's DNA. This is the only charity...
The Royal Foundation was the charity that was originally set up for William and Harry to sort of launch their charitable endeavours.
Their Royal Foundation is a team effort, but we also seem to get an insight into how Meghan may want to do things her own way.
Most attention was on Meghan Markle and what sort of issues she will take on.
Meghan, it's well known you've championed the empowerment of women and young girls and promoting their self-worth. How do you hope to continue that work with the Royal Foundation?
Women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it, and people need to be encouraged to listen. And I think right now in the climate that we're seeing with so many campaigns, I mean, with Me Too, there is no better time than to really continue to shine a light on women feeling empowered and people really helping to support them.
This is the first time that we've heard anyone associated with the royal family talking about those campaigns. Kate, for example, didn't wear black to the BAFTAs, and Camilla, who also supports women's organisations, hasn't mentioned Me Too or Time's Up. But Kensington Palace...
It's important to remember the royal family in the UK and the causes that they champion are deliberately non-controversial. Meghan was more of an activist.
I didn't know that would be taboo to talk about. To me, it was just topical.
All the work you do together is great, but working together as family, do you ever have disagreements about things?
Oh, yes. Healthy disagreement.
Okay, the last thing you disagreed on, how do you resolve it?
I can't remember. They come so thick and fast.
But is it resolved? We don't know.
Oh, we don't know. Well, you're putting on a great show if it's...
All right, Mark, what do you got?
All right. So look, what's very, very clear here is how Harry doesn't control himself in this situation the way that everybody else seems to, especially very, very different from his brother down the end and Duchess of, what is she? Duchess of Sussex, I think. No, hang on. Anyway, can't remember which Duchess she is. Anyway, yeah, very, 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 very different. Over on his ankles are always have a broken line in them. Crossed legs at the ankle line as well. Again, very unavailable to be able to get up and act really quickly. The chair moves from side to side to side to side. Meghan, to his one side, starts mirroring that behavior as well. So very uncontrolled, uncertain. In the interview, we've got, didn't know it was taboo to talk about. To me, it was just topical. But on just topical, there is a single shoulder shrug. I don't believe Meghan believes that this was just topical. I think she knows that in her mind it was something just a little bit more than that. And of course, at the time, of course, it was something more than just topical. It was the Me Too movement was probably the biggest thing, the biggest topic in the news. So why not just go, this thing wasn't just topical. I wanted to talk about it because it was the biggest issue at the time and an important issue. But she goes, no. She minimizes it. Goes, it was just topical. Okay. There's clearly some disagreement going on here because we get Meghan suppressing on Harry's forearm there. She covers her mouth. There's a block there. She vents with the back of her hair there to let out heat. I think those are good indicators that there already is something going on between those brothers, or the brothers and the wives as well. However, what's interesting is they cover it, the males cover it really quite well with some fairly good just English British banter going on. There's a bit of badinage goes on between them and they cover it quite well. It maybe doesn't need that. The suppressors that Meghan produces probably give away that there's more going on than they would like to put forward. But Chase, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, so right at the, how do you hope to continue that work with the Royal Foundation? Right at that question, Harry shows immediate contempt as he's turning back to look at M. And there's no mind reading here, but I'm guessing that this has to do with the response that he knows is coming. I'm guessing. Contempt is this kind of one-sided smile here, and it typically denotes a feeling of disdain or disrespect. And as a fun fact, quickly here, contempt is the only genuine facial expression that is asymmetrical. So next, we're hearing this, and I'm going to quickly go through this. Women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it. and people need to be encouraged to listen. And I think right now, in the climate that we're seeing so many campaigns, I mean, Me Too, there is no better time to really continue to shine a light on women feeling empowered and people really helping to support. Here's my challenge to you, dear viewer. How do you hope to continue that work? Let's look at that. That's the question she was asked. My challenge here is twofold. Number one, find anything, even one little group of words that speaks to anything at all that's specific. Number two is to find an answer to that question. And right at the end here, we're seeing, I didn't know that would be taboo to talk about. It's a good thing she didn't talk about it at all. It was just 2 words. She didn't talk about it. Not even for 1 second did she talk about it. And then when she says, to me, it was just topical, she didn't mention it being important or relevant or something that was important to her. It was just a topical thing that she covered. And right at the words, do y'all ever disagree with each other? Do you have disagreements? I thought it was great watching all 4 chairs start to swivel at the exact same time on the stage. Everybody up there. That was a great end. And I think, not that we're making fun of them for all doing that. I think it's great to see that they're human. It's great to get a reminder that the royals are just human beings. Greg?
Yeah, interesting. I agree with you. There's a whole lot going on, Mark, when you say they do a good job of banter to try to cover up the problem. I'm going to start at the end and go backward in this case, like you do a lot of times, Chase. Look at the end of that video. Yes, in fact, they do banter, but at the end, they both end up with their eyes down and to the right, which we associate with emotion. And Harry is gripping his thigh, and that's an adapter to release nervous energy. Look at William. His lower teeth are exposed. We associate that with anger. So there's some big rub between them. And that's just telling you that the body language we can see, no matter how effectively you try to cover up what you're thinking, your body leaks. And that's the piece, we said that to Tarek, you can't hide body language. It's a tough thing to learn to go. It's interesting to watch, though, Harry, in the beginning, to your point, Mark, is he's swiveling and he's adapting, but he does that 12-year-old body language, which you don't see most adult males do, crossing his ankles under him like he's 12. It's an odd thing that I find. I would poke on him a little bit and say, well, why you do that? That's a little odd. He also, when Meghan starts to speak, his feet are crossed and his hands are in his lap and he's swiveling and he's internalizing something as he's looking down to the left before he looks over with contempt, as you pointed out, Chase. And he shelters his eyes from his brother, kind of a quick little look. All that tells you there's something going on here. And I think she did not think anything of it. I think she just acted like an American actor. I've got an opinion and I'm going to say what I think without any regard for what would happen. And I think that probably created a whole lot of problems, Mark. And that's might be the shoulder shrug that we're seeing, because when she starts talking, William's mouth narrows. He's got a big smile, so you can't miss it when his mouth narrows. And Kate swivels quietly in her chair when it starts. In very, very proper English fashion. They're very contained. Everything's smaller, as we'll hear Meghan point out later, but it's still very noticeable. I think that's what we're seeing is she went and did what she does without any regard for what the role called for. And I think that created some headaches. Scott, what do you got?
I agree with you. That's good. That's a good one. So when they enter and sit down, of course, like you guys have all talked about, how Harry sits down, he starts wobbling back and forth, and he starts preening again. He's goofing around with his pants. He goes to the jacket a couple of times, constantly preening himself. And then when it cuts back to him, if you juxtapose Meghan and Harry against Kate and William, you're looking at 2 completely different scenes. That tells you who's hooked up and who's locked up and good to go and who isn't. Because Harry and Meghan are not in the headspace they should be in to be in that situation. All you have to do is look at his older brother and his wife compared to these 2, because they're sitting still, like you guys were saying. Harry's sitting, or William's sitting there. He's sitting the way you're supposed to. There's a way to sit that way. There's all kinds of ways to look relaxed if you're on TV and stuff. I always bring up Nate Bargatze, the most competent sitter I've ever seen in my life, when he's sitting there on some talk show, and it looks so comfortable, and he looks like the guy in charge. And in this case, William looks just like he should look on there, so just like you would expect him to look. And so does Kate. She looks, her posture is great, but then look at Meghan's. She's slouching. Look at William's posture. His is straight up and he's looking right at the interviewer, but look at Harry's. He's just slouched. He's just sitting there with his arm on the thing slouched over. It doesn't look good. It doesn't read well for them. when the question comes up about the disagreements, we see all the hallmarks of embarrassment from Meghan. She does the thing where she covers her mouth and she comes up and she gets the hair down in her face. She covers her eyes, then her whole face with her hand. She's embarrassed with that because she knows that's where all the heat is. And I'll bet they don't talk much. I bet she doesn't talk much to Kate or William, either one. And that's why they're giggling so hard and laughing so hard. And I think it's more of a release of that stress and pressure from that than it is actually something being funny. Or yes, we have our little fusses. I think that's the big one. I think we all know, like you were asking what you thought the rub might be, Greg, it's Meghan. So because she turns and tries to lock up with William for a second, she gets that just briefly, but turns around really quick, trying to connect with him. Then for somebody who constantly talks about how they pick the perfect woman to fill this role and to go in because he's seeing she can do everything so well and handles everything so perfectly, why is she constantly apologizing and saying, I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And there's a question about her not doing the curtsy right. She's sitting weird. She's saying things she shouldn't be saying, or what they say isn't the protocol to be saying. She's doing all these things that go against everything he's saying that she's doing well. So we're seeing a little push there from good to bad, from what's supposed to be good is actually bad. I don't think it's what he's relaying is happening is actually happening. I don't think she's the perfect person for this. I don't think she could step into that and make it happen. It's obvious. She's constantly apologizing, constantly being called out by the press or whoever. I know a lot of that's propaganda. But look at all the time she's apologizing, saying, I didn't know you're supposed to do that. I didn't know how to do that. There's nobody to tell you what to do. I don't know what to do. Makes you wonder. And all he talks about is how wonderful she is. So there's something there.
The eyewitness is you.
Welcome to the very first Royal Foundation Forum. Now, the principle of working together is in the Foundation's DNA. This is the only charity.
The Royal Foundation was the charity that was originally set up for William and Harry to sort of launch their charitable endeavours.
Their Royal Foundation is a team effort, but we also seem to get an insight into how Meghan may want to do things her own way.
Most attention was on Meghan Markle and what sort of issues she will take on.
Meghan, it's well known you've championed the empowerment of women and young girls and promoting their self-worth. How do you hope to continue that work with the Royal Foundation?
Women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it, and people need to be encouraged to listen. And I think right now in the climate that we're seeing with so many campaigns, I mean, with Me Too, there is no better time than to really continue to shine a light on women feeling empowered and people really helping to support them.
This is the first time that we've heard anyone associated with the royal family talking about those campaigns. Kate, for example, didn't wear black to the BAFTAs, and Camilla, who also supports women's organisations, hasn't mentioned Me Too or Time's Up. But Kensington Palace...
It's important to remember the royal family in the UK and the causes that they champion are deliberately non-controversial. Meghan was more of an activist.
I didn't know that would be taboo to talk about. To me, it was just topical.
All the work you do together is great, but working together as family, do you ever have disagreements about things?
Oh, yes. healthy disagreement.
Okay, the last thing you disagreed on, how do you resolve it?
I can't remember. They come so thick and fast.
But is it resolved? We don't know.
Oh, we don't know. Well, you're putting on a great show if it's...
Joining this family, I knew that there was a protocol for how things were done. And do you remember that old movie, Princess Diaries, with Anne Hathaway?
Me? A princess? Shut up! I can teach you to walk, talk, sit, stand, eat, dress like a princess.
There's no class in some person who goes sit like this, cross your legs like this, use this fork, don't do this, curtsy then, wear this kind of hat. Doesn't happen.
Some people on Twitter suggesting it looked a little bit like the happy poo emoji.
So I needed to learn a lot, including the national anthem.
How did you learn it?
Oh, I Googled it.
Well, girls, your last day at the Zermatt School for Young Ladies. Your final and most important lesson.
I Googled it and I would sit there and I'd practice and I'd practice and I'd practice.
She broke royal protocol by even though she and Harry are not yet married.
And then on top of that, with the press, a lot of invented protocols.
It was baptism by fire.
I have to ask, did anyone have to teach you how to do the wave?
That's not a thing. You just sort of watch it and go, okay, I guess that's what, I mean, I don't know. I guess you don't want to wave like an American, like, everything is just smaller.
Okay, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, she feels stress here. I'm not going to cover a lot of it. I think there's a little bit of, look, I'm a princess and an actor in this. I mean, guys, if you want arrogance, there's plenty of it to go around here, and I'll let you guys cover those pieces. But she's uncomfortable enough with it to cross her abdomen and adapt at her face. So maybe even then, she is perceptive that people may or may not receive this the right way. All actors take on a role and they try to learn more about the thing that they're supposed to do. The other thing is this woman has an attendant with her. There's a guy who does all of her makeup earlier. If I needed help to figure out how I'm supposed to behave, how I'm supposed to act, how I'm supposed to do all that, I'd lean over and say, hey, one of these aides, can you please tell me how I do this? That's just me. Maybe I'm just dumb, or maybe I don't like putting the fault on others. But if you believe something to be true, it becomes true. And if she believes that she was never given enough guidance, and that's enough, there you go. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to cover a lot of biology. I think I'm wasting my time on that one. Scott, what do you got?
All right. Yeah, I agree with you. She explains there's no class. She explains nobody shows you. There's no way to get this information, right? But like you said, Greg, she never says, you know what I ought to do? Because I love this guy. I want to fit into the family. I'm going to have to talk to somebody. Because apparently Kate got the information. She never had a problem. From as far as I know, she was having the same kind of problems. So she knows something I don't. Let me call her, or let me call somebody, and like you said, an aide or somebody, and say what's going on. This makes me think that there actually is a way to get that information. There is somebody to teach you. There is, what are you saying, Chase? A PowerPoint.
31-point dossier.
Okay. Well, then they haven't told her because they don't like her and they don't want her to do well. I think maybe there is something going on. Nobody told her about it. What else could it be? If there is, she says, it just doesn't work that way because nobody's ever said, hey, man, look, pulled her aside and said, here's what you do. Go over there and talk to this guy. He's going to give you that PowerPoint thing. And then I will have the guy or the lady to come in and show you how to do this stuff. There's a way we do all this. Nobody said it to her. Think about that, how they must feel about her. If that's true. I don't know if it is, but it seems to me that would be true. And then she's trying to create this rags to riches story, this fish out of water story. She doesn't fit in. She's never fit in from the beginning, but he keeps saying how wonderful she is and how she fits right in. Fits like a glove. Everything's perfect with her. Everything at that point. And I'm looking at this from an interrogator's perspective, and I'm thinking, why is she doing this? Why is she creating these stories? What kind of stories is she creating these? What's the purpose of this? I guess to save face, to save her ego, I would imagine. But I'm starting to look at this from a different perspective and saying, why is she doing all this? Why is she having so many problems? That's the question that keeps coming up with me. What's really going on over there with her? I think it is bad. I think it might be worse than she thinks it is, as far as people not liking her, because I don't think they're giving her the information that she could use or that she needs. Mark, what do you got?
Well, let's break down whether that's true or not. The rags to riches story is often called Pygmalion, and it was written by George Bernard Shaw, and it's the idea of somebody taking a bet and going, I bet I can teach class. You're not born with it. I bet it can be I bet it can be learned. And so what we need to do now is any way that it could be learned, that it could be transferred, you'd have to take that down. So here's how it happens in the documentary. They actually show in a comical manner, using one of Britain's most famous comic actresses, a piece of a clip of a finishing school, which is where the aristocracy go in order to be finished and be presented in court and therefore ready for the protocols. The protocols are taught. You certainly get to. Diana went to a Swiss finishing school in order to then be presented at court, which is where she would have met Charles and be seen as a possible suitor. Now, of course, Meghan isn't part of that structure, but you could go, hey, we'll just do a super fast finishing school and then you'll know everything. But of course, what you do is you show a silly clip of finishing school. So it's just like, see, why would you go there? It's just all of an English kind of nonsense. And in fact, she waves stuff away. Well, that's not a thing. The wave thing, that's not a thing. Waving in a certain way. Well, how do you know it's not a thing? Now you know that. Now you know that for sure. Well, I guess you have to watch. Yes, I guess you have to. Yeah, so that's one of the ways that you learn. In diplomacy, what you do is you get sent to a bunch of countries and you're like going, I don't know what to do there. And they employ people who go, yeah, so don't worry about it. I'll watch. I'll be careful. I'll take it slowly. And very soon they won't know that I'm around. They'll like me. And then, I'll be able to talk to all kinds of people. So diplomats do taking it slowly and watching really, really well. But she puts that forward as an idea. I guess you have to watch. So she has learned some of this stuff by watching. Oh, the national anthem. I Googled that. Yeah, you can Google some of the stuff. Now she's learned to Google. I mean, I'm not trying to be, catty about it, but she said, first of all, that she wouldn't Google him, well, because she went on his Instagram, but now she's found Google. Well, nothing wrong with that, but there's, that's A and not A at the same time. You can't have, you let them eat cake and eat it as well. The hat thing. The hat thing's wonderful because the British have made fun out of aristocrats' hats for centuries. It's one of the staples. Is anything in the hosiery line? Anything in terms of, it's in Shakespeare. Hats and stockings. Okay, hats and stockings. You make fun of people's hats and stockings because it's a simple piece of hosiery to make, or millinery to make fun of. So that's a classic. Well, and then, this really gets me. Everything is just smaller. And there's a sense of condescension there, which, yes, in the UK, everything is smaller because it's a tiny little island with lots of people on it. It's been very, very poor for the majority of its time, apart from the aristocracy who've had huge amounts of European wealth. And so everything that we have is much, much smaller than you get in America. And so if you're going to be diplomatic around it, you would never reduce Britain into, it's just all so small. Chase, what do you got on this one?
I'm sorry that happened, Mark. But let's talk about the protocols. She has spent the better half of this self-made documentary talking about not knowing there was a protocol for these things. And now all of a sudden, she's talking about all the protocols. And when she brings up this old movie, Princess Diaries, it's not that old. Right when she brings it up, we see head downcast and eyes up, eyes looking up like this at the interviewer. And this is an attempt to look like Princess Diana, and I'll prove it to you. This behavior is commonly called a chin tuck. It's a protective gesture, but when it's done by someone we see as innocent, like Princess Diana, it triggers a protective nature in us. in one of the best books on body language that was ever written by Alan and Barbara Pease, there is literally a photo of Princess Diana on the page that discusses the chin tuck. It's right there. And this, I think she is known for this behavior, especially in body language circles. You see an amateur body language expert will have that on their PowerPoint. They'll have Princess Diana when they talk about the chin tuck, because that's how prevalent that is. And when she talks about the national anthem, Mark, I had it right here in my notes. I'm glad that she knows how to use Google now. And it would seem this would be a great moment to talk about how Harry taught you how to sing the national anthem. This would be a great moment to talk about how great your relationship is and how your husband's not screwing you over. But now, after all of these protocols that she's talking about, it goes right to Harry saying these are invented protocols. It's an exaggeration. It's over the top. And Meghan's making the headlines. Meghan is making the headlines a pathway to victimhood. And Harry's saying they're just invented nonsense. The entirety of this clip is like a combination of Amber Heard and Kamala Harris from a behavioral perspective. And that's all I got.
Let me ask y'all something. Without naming, without one of our books coming into the discussion, what do you think the best book for somebody just starting body language? What do you think the best book for them to get would be? Greg, what do you think?
You know, I don't know. I'm going to be the hardest one of all of us, because I think you need to start before body language. I think you need to start thinking about people as a study. And I always say, go back to Desmond Morris, To the Naked Ape. It's the best single behavior book I know.
What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would go back to Morris and Man Watching here, simply because I'm big into pictures, and it's the pictures. Photography is great in there, just in terms of human behavior, and you can't take your eyes off it. So I like that.
Chase, what do you think?
I think that one I mentioned, I think it's called The Definitive Guide, or The Definitive Guide to Body Language by Barbara and Alan Pease.
Yep.
Yeah. The Definitive Book of Body Language.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan.
Cool. Ready?
You know, here's yeah.
I'd go with what everybody is saying, Joe Navarro. For the way things are these days and the things people are looking for, they're looking for true crime, they're looking for body language at work and all that. That's what I always suggest. So that's what I would suggest. What are you going to say, Greg?
I was just going to say, anybody else look at this woman, look, regardless of what you think of her, look, she's not a royal. She went there, she goes in this whole thing. I get all that. I'm married to a Greek woman. First time I went to church with her, I could have just stood out like a sore thumb and done something really, really stupid. Or I could go, hold on, those people aren't doing that stupid thing. Guess what I chose to do? And any culture you go to, it doesn't matter where it's at in the world. All of us have moved from culture to culture to culture without anybody teaching us. We had to sit, pay attention, and learn. Chase, your time in the Middle East. Scott, your time moving between different cultures. Mark, your time moving between different cultures and this acting things. We have to adapt anywhere we go. So I just...
Let me give one more thing on that as well, Greg, because when it comes to royalty and the aristocracy, there is one place that you can always go to learn, and that is the staff. So my mother was in service at one of the biggest houses, the biggest house actually in the UK, probably the biggest in Europe. And she knew the protocols for everything. So we would get taught the protocols of, like, here's what you do, here's how your shoes should be, here's what you do when you meet this kind of person, here's what happened. No, I've never had to use hardly any of it, but she knew everything. I bet the aristocracy and the royals didn't know half the stuff that the service would know. So always, it's like when you're anywhere, where you're at a restaurant and you don't know what to do, just ask the service and they'll help you.
Yeah.
The eyewitness is you.
Joining this family, I knew that there was a protocol for how things were done. And do you remember that old movie, Princess Diaries, with Anne Hathaway?
Me? A princess? Shut up! I can teach you to walk, talk, sit, stand, eat, dress like a princess.
There's no class in some person who goes sit like this, cross your legs like this, use this fork, don't do this, curtsy then, wear this kind of hat. Doesn't happen.
Some people on Twitter suggesting it looked a little bit like the happy poo emoji.
So I needed to learn a lot, including the national anthem.
How did you learn it?
Oh, I Googled it.
Well, girls, your last day at the Zermatt School for Young Ladies. Your final and most important lesson.
I Googled it and I would sit there and I'd practice and I'd practice and I'd practice.
She broke royal protocol even though she and Harry are not yet married.
And then on top of that, with the press, a lot of invented protocols.
It was baptism by fire.
I have to ask, did anyone have to teach you how to do the wave?
That's not a thing. You just sort of watch it and go, okay, I guess that's what, I mean, I don't know. I guess you don't want to wave like an American, like, ah! Everything is just smaller.
Just also writing a tell-all disparaging book, and Kensington Palace is not commented, but you guys, to be a fly on the wall when he gets to meet Harry and the royal family for the first time.
We were playing whack-a-mole every day. It was like, hit, wait, another one popped up. Wait, stop, another story popped. They were constant. They were going through the woodwork and pulling out people to create and plant the most salacious stories that they could. And then it started to get scary.
Police there say a white powder letter was sent to soon-to-be royal
Inside that
Meghan
package,
Markle
we've since learned, was some kind of white substance. That substance had been subjected to a wave of abuse and harassment in national newspapers.
This was on the heels of those terrorist attacks, right? Yeah. So there was so much concern about the wedding. It was just so scary, and they were just talking about getting snipers and...
It was a public event, right?
Behind the scenes of all that, I was just turtling.
Communication with Meg became less and less frequent. My impression was that her relationships were being managed on some level.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I got no body language on this. I just want to point out the propaganda that's going on. Invent salacious gossip is the idea. Okay, they invent salacious gossip, and then we see a headline from the National Enquirer, then one from the Sun, then another from the National Enquirer, and then one from the Mirror. Two of those, the Enquirer and the Enquirer, like we all know that's kind of comedy stuff. That's like the clear, it's made up lunacy. Apologies to anybody who reads the National Enquirer thinking that anything in it is accurate. The headlines are just, just extreme. The Sun and the Mirror, of course they make up, big headlines, but there is usually, if you read the last sentence of an article, there's usually some data with it, which is accurate there because they have to stand by some kind of press standards, and their standard is by the last sentence, it will be accurate. So we get National Enquirer, bizarre headline. Then the Sun snorts cocaine. Then National Enquirer, out there, bizarre headline, salacious gossip. And then Mirror, related to a serial killer. Well, if you look at the idea of her being related to a serial killer, it is actually accurate. By her eighth cousin to the great-great-grandson of what is believed to be America's first ever serial killer in 1861. But that's like, most people, therefore, in America would probably be related to that person, just like most people can go, Abraham Lincoln, slightly, related to that person. That's the nature of how family trees kind of scatter out. So, the Mirror, and salacious, but accurate, okay? The Sun's one is that she snorts cocaine. Possibly. I mean, probably. I don't know, but, in TV, it's hard to get work done, unless somebody's got a little, but well, it is. I mean, it's just the reality. It's just the reality. So probably. I mean, they're going, she definitely does on the headline, but then we might kind of read down and go, yeah, possibly. Anyway, are they really inventing stuff so salacious? Well, I mean, the way that they've layered it up, we're headed towards the bizarre ideas of the National Enquirer rather than the kind of probabilities or bizarre chains of events of the other headlines. One last thing. They talk about this idea of the terrorist attacks and the shooters being on the roofs and the security around that. Well, welcome to England. I mean, just, bombs go off regularly.
You were in a bar. Tell the story about when you were.
Oh, yeah, well, that was Tracy that got blown up by that bomb. I've been blown up by 2. I mean, we would sit there in our flat and wait for calls going, I hope they got off the bus. I mean, that's the reality of the UK. Part of the reason I'm now in Canada is we used to get blown up quite relentlessly. Yeah, not as a nation, as a nation and personally. So after a while, and that's just like, welcome. And this was, without the IRA being around anymore. I think back in those days. And you got family members who are taken out by that organization. So that's England, and anybody English and British absolutely understand that reality. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I actually remember Mark being in England when the M1 was shut down because of the bombs in the overpasses. So I remember those days. That's in the 90s. That was pretty common before all the IRA dismantling and that. Look, here's the thing. If you get famous tomorrow where you become a singularity, which she is, regardless of if you like her or you do not, if you say Meghan, she's going to be the first person that jumps to people's mind right now. If that happens, expect every redneck, every person in your life who wants to be famous by association to come out of the woodwork. If they knew you in the 3rd grade, you were best friends. You were going to be doing something goofy with them in the 3rd grade. Whatever it is, they're going to happen. The best example I would think of that is, imagine you're makeup a person, Garth Brooks. People know who he is. Country star who was in Oklahoma, rural place, or Dr. Phil for that matter, somebody who lived in those areas. Everybody they know in the world is going to come forward with some kind of story. Whether it's true or not's not important. It's just publishable. So they're going to get people to come out. What is interesting with her for me here is this is congruent when she's talking. Her message, to your point, Mark, you were saying there's not a lot of body language. There's body language, but it is good body language, in my opinion. Her cadence, her pitch, her tone they all work together with her hands, with her concern and grief in her forehead when she's talking about that whack-a-mole. They kept coming out of nowhere, and her illustrators are coming up. I think it looks good. And then the piece that's more interesting to me out of all the body language in this entire thing is when her niece is talking about the situation and how she was disinvited from the wedding. You can hear that vocal fry in her and the frustration. You can't miss the frustration in that woman's face. And you see her eyes drifting down to the right and moving around in concern in her brow. Really interesting that this has to happen that way, but everybody should expect that happens when you get famous. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I think the palace has actually fully confirmed there was no mandate not to invite that person. They actually put that on record. But during this whack-a-mole thing, Greg, you were talking about, there's one thing here that really stood out to me today, and this is the smile on her face when she's talking about this. It's a genuine smile talking about these articles coming up. And it happens at this precise moment that the point is made. And I think this indicates that it's more of a sincere desire for approval from the interviewer. I think she was proud of using this metaphor, number one, which also described nothing specific. Zero, actually. And then when she says turtling, I can't believe you guys did not launch onto this.
I have it in my notes, but I left it.
I'm not done yet.
She narrates this with her body, and it's after some hesitation, and it's hard to see it, but there's a smirk again right after this delivery. I think she's proud of her delivery and how she delivered this to somebody. And I think this is the definition. This is the definition of duping delight. And what we mean by that, if Scott, you could explain that better than I could, if you could just quickly run through that as I hand it off to you.
Oh, but yeah, you nailed it though. Dang it. Anyway, so duping delight is an emotion that leaks when someone feels like they're getting away with something. They derive pleasure from that. Their face will be like this, and you may see a really quick, like that, their mouth go up just a little tiny little smile. It happens really quickly, within a tenth of a second sometimes. And sometimes it's bigger than that you'll see them actually smile real big. But we call that duper's delight or duping delight because it's a leaking of an emotion. So that was nailed by Paul Ekman, to give him credit for that. So how's that, Chase?
Beautiful.
All right. But yeah, so I won't go on to the turtling things that you nailed that. This is the most movement we've seen so far in her body language and her behavior. The sincerity seems honest. It looks honest. I'm under the impression it's acting. The facial expressions, for the most part, I think are real or true. Her illustrators are on point, and her voice tone, timbre, volume, cadence, everything is as it should be. But something gives me the feeling that we're not seeing her be honest about her expressions and her feelings here. And I think it goes back to that turtling thing, Chase, where we see that quick little duping delight there. But everything seems to be as it should be. But for some reason, I'm getting a gut feeling that it's not.
The eyewitness is you.
Just also writing a tell-all disparaging book, and Kensington Palace is not commented, but you guys to be a fly on the wall when he gets to meet Harry and the royal family for the first time.
We were playing whack-a-mole every day. It was like, wait, another one popped up. Wait, stop, another story. Constant. They were going through the woodwork and pulling out people to create and plant the most salacious stories that they could. And then it started to get scary.
Police there say a white powder letter was sent to soon-to-be royal
Inside
Meghan
that package,
Markle
we've since learned, was some kind of white substance. That substance had been subjected to a wave of abuse and harassment in national newspapers.
This was on the heels of those terrorist attacks, right?
Yeah.
So there was so much concern about the wedding. It was just so scary, and they were just talking about getting snipers and...
It was a public event, right?
Behind the scenes of all that, I was just turtling.
Communication with Meg became less and less frequent. My impression was that her relationships were being managed on some level.
There is an aspiration for a controlled narrative.
Our comms team at that time was joined with my brother's office. So in total, there was only one person really dedicated to us. So it was a huge undertaking.
I don't think anyone understands what that very small comms team was dealing with. They just couldn't wrap their head around, and I have compassion for it. How do we explain that this half-sister isn't invited to the wedding, but that the half-sister's daughter is? And so, with Ashley, the guidance at the time was to not have her come to our wedding. I was in the car with H, and I called her and I had her on speakerphone, and we talked her through what guidance we were being given and why this assessment was made. And that's painful.
I think I said I was hurt on some level, but I understood where it was coming from. To know that it was because of my biological mother that this relationship that's so important to me was impacted in that way. To feel like because of her it was taken away has been hard.
All right, C, what do you got?
Well, S, during this time when she's talking about nobody understands what this comms team was dealing with, they just couldn't get their head around, there's nothing there. We're waiting for some topic to come in. She says they just couldn't get their head around, and I have compassion for it. Super strange, lacking, completely devoid of anything. What guidance from who? She said that's painful. And I think right when she said, and that's just painful, there's another, what I would just call now a post-statement smile. Maybe we can call it duping delight. But when the sister comes on, she says, I think I said on some level, which is meaningless, because of my biological mother, which gives no description of anything, which is meaningless, the relationship was impacted that way. She doesn't describe any way, more meaningless. And I mean meaningless in every sense of the word. There is no meaning to anything that's going on there. And she says, because of her, it was taken away. Meaningless again. But we're also seeing expert level storycraft, mostly because I would call this expert level. Mark may disagree, because it's being done well while conveying no meaning, no facts, no actual declarative sentences or any substance whatsoever. So I would call that pretty masterful. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, look, at this point in this documentary, I start to think the producers must know the irony that they're layering in here, and they're just having a laugh at the subjects. I've got to think this must be true, because at the start of this, the person being interviewed says there is an aspiration for a controlled narrative. It's like, who are you talking about? Because it sounds like you're talking about Meghan and Harry, are you? Or are you talking about the royal or both? I mean, it's both. It's definitely both. So as the documentary makers, I gotta wonder if they were sitting there going, oh, it'd be really funny if we put that in there. Because look, both things are going on here at the same time, aren't they? I really hope that that irony wasn't in there by accident. So they say, how do we explain who is not invited? How do we explain who's not invited? Well, yeah, that's weddings, isn't it? I mean, that's having a wedding. Like, not everybody can come, can they? And you have to make choices, and you have to explain to people. I mean, I've heard all kinds of horrible stories about how people found out they weren't invited to and they're at an event. It's like, oh, because they're getting married, and the person's like, are they? Well, I'm not invited. I mean, it's all, everybody's got their stories. Chase, I'm sure you maybe have some stories yourself. I mean,
this week.
Yeah. Well, there we go. So isn't it lovely? Because the royals, of course, are always an avatar for our own feelings. They're always like, hey, I couldn't invite so-and-so, but it wasn't as bad as that. I mean, that's really bad. So look, they're having it bad, but they're having it no worse than other people who can't have people come to a wedding. That's weddings, Anyway, she does say, because it is painful, she says that's painful, but we see asymmetry. I think you mentioned it, Chase. We see asymmetry in the face. Now, is that disdain? Is that dupers? Is that bitterness? I don't know, but she says it's painful, and I don't see any pain. So I see no pain, but I do see asymmetry in the face, which could be a number of things there, none of which are pain. Certainly could be bitterness, disdain, or even a certain delight in that. Not sure which one it is. Maybe others can kind of weigh in there on that. The sister, though I absolutely agree with what you're saying there, Chase, that it's devoid of meaning. I think there is definite pain, concern in the thought, huge amounts of concern, though she can't maybe get her fingers on what the real meaning is or what it really is. She can't get words to it. Like, that is hard concern in the face there. I think I see disdain for the mother relationship. And then there's some lip compression and retraction on some unspoken feelings about it right at the end. So I think there's some real pain with I think the sister, with Megan. I'm not seeing the pain that she's talking about there around that classic wedding thing of not everybody can come, and there's politics comes into it, and it's an awful, horrible situation in what should be the best day ever. Greg, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, it's really easy. Look, my sister's a redneck. Her daughter isn't. That's how you deal with it. You just say, look, she's a redneck. Everybody in ordinary life has to deal with that. Not even a matter of how many seats you have. Sometimes there are people you don't want at your weddings. You don't want them at your house. Everybody's related to somebody they don't want near their good china, for example. Whatever it is, whatever your thing is, whether it's silver or it's dollars or it's something else, you don't want people around, or it's just relationships. And you just say, hell no, they're not coming. And here's why. That's easy enough. I get when you're a royal, you don't get to say those words, but you can explain that away a little bit more graciously using your communications team. Chase, you want to know that this guy had the same experience we had in the military. You know how I know he doesn't? He talks in feelings and uncertainties. Do you remember the first time you told a senior chief, or in your case, what do you guys call him? A senior chief, right? You said, well, I think it's kind of like this. How did that go over? Yeah, that's not, we speak in specifics. We say, I'm going to do this. I will do that. By this time, I'll have completed this. Have you done this? Yes or no? He doesn't. He talks in those loose, open-ended sentences and feelings a hell of a lot. Now, is that something that's happened to him recently? Maybe. But if he went through 10 years in the military and got away with talking that way, it's very different than our experience. His blink rate, I think, here is frustration with having a single person to cover both of those guys. You can see his blink rate go up through the roof. And I think it's feelings again for him. I think he feels like he was shorted somehow. But I love, Mark, you were talking about her saying it was painful, and her eyes went down and to her left as she said it was painful, into internal voice when she does that asymmetry. So I don't associate that with pain in any way. If she had pain and feelings about it, they're gone. She's reconciled it and said, it's gone. When she starts to talk about the call, she starts off by doing some barriering and adapting. And then when she starts to explain it, she does the kind of face of almost like Angela Simpson in Oops, If He Wasn't, that kind of reconciliation in her voice, and it's just there and moves on. For me, watching her do this is just awkward, to say the least. But watching the sister, the niece, is painful. Watching that niece, you can see her eyes are down and right. She has concern in her brow. You can hear the fry in her voice, and her instinctively moving her eyes up and to her left to break away from any chance there'll be tears, and then doing some barriering and adapting. Just tough to watch. Whatever caused it, look, everybody goes through this. That's all part of being human. These are people who say they don't want attention, and we're getting to know everything about all of their life. Scott, what do you got?
Is she a half cousin then? Because it's her mother's half sister's
niece. So it's her sister's. It's her half sister's daughter. It's her niece.
Or her half. Okay, I thought it was her mother's half sister's daughter.
No, half sister's daughter.
Okay. Okay, so she's the niece. All right. Well, I'm going to skip all the other stuff and get right to her, because I think this is the first real, true emotion we've seen throughout all the videos in the last two episodes before this that we've done. This is the first time we see somebody really feeling something, and we're seeing what they feel, and there are no holds barred or held back here. She's trying to restrain her feelings, and she's doing a pretty good job of it. Her body language that would make her break down stuff. But I think it's a great example of someone who's actually sad and they're hurt. And we juxtapose her body language of sadness against Megan's supposed body language and behavior of sadness. Well, that's two completely different stories there. Megan is I don't think she's sad at all, because at the end she's like that. And this poor girl is she's frustrated and she's angry and she's really hurt. We see all the classic cues and behaviors of loss. We see anger, contempt, concern, sadness, grief, frustration. And again, she does a great job restraining these things with a little help from Botox right up in here, because we don't see a lot of movement in the brow, and that's why, but we do see some right in here. Her vocal tone is soft and her volume is low. Her diction is really clean and clear. Her cadence is slow. Her arms and shoulders pull in. She got her hands down here, and she's adapting with her hands and doing the pacifying gestures or cues that we see, and we call that or Joe Navarro nailed that as pacification, a self-pacification when you do any repetitive gesture. At the same time, she's adapting when she squeezes, trying to get rid of that built-up stress and tension. Her eyes are glassy a little bit from tears, where she's tearing up. And we're seeing more and more head movement from the beginning of this to the end of this, because the further along she goes and explains what's happening or what happened or the way things are, her frustration, I think, builds along with her anger, and we see a little bit more movement in there. She's extremely guarded with her wording, which I thought was interesting, because she's like Greg always talks about editing as you go along. Because when she says, she was getting ready to say, to feel like it was taken away, she goes, she sees a little, feel like it was taken away. So she's editing as she goes along there. You can see her thinking about it as her eyes are jumping around and moving. She's thinking about what she's getting ready to say, making sure she's saying the correct thing. She wants everything to be proper and correct, because she doesn't know why she's been shunned from the wedding. You know, she has a good idea. It's a family thing or whatever, but she's trying to show that she understands the way she's supposed to act and exhibit the behavior she's supposed to. If Meghan was a third as concerned as she was, she wouldn't have any problems at all with being called out for the stuff she isn't doing. And I didn't know to do this. I didn't know to do that. This woman is paying attention to all that. She wants to make sure everything is correct, and she's showing the way she really feels with this. And even though it's sad, I think it's my favorite interview in the whole thing we've seen so far of anybody talking. And I think when she says it's been hard, if we saw nothing else in this video of her, just that 3 seconds of her saying that, it would tell the whole story of how she feels about what's happening here. Because we see anger, sadness, contempt, and frustration all within that little 2 to 3 second pocket there. So I think that is a great study in sadness and frustration right there, because she's worried about it. She actually lost something. So I think we're seeing a great example of someone feeling loss and trying not to go, oh, woe is me and all that, and trying to keep it together, but leaking all over the place, all these little things of anger and contempt and frustration and sadness.
The eyewitness is you.
There is an aspiration for a controlled narrative.
Our comms team at that time was joined with my brother's office. So in total, there was only one person really dedicated to us. So it was a huge undertaking.
I don't think anyone understands what that very small comms team was dealing with. They just couldn't wrap their head around, and I have compassion for it. How do we explain that this half-sister isn't invited to the wedding, but that the half-sister's daughter is? And so, with Ashley, the guidance at the time was to not have her come to our wedding. I was in the car with H, and I called her and I had her on speakerphone, and we talked her through what guidance we were being given and why this assessment was made. And that's painful.
I think I said I was hurt on some level, but I understood where it was coming from. To know that it was because of my biological mother that this relationship that's so important to me was impacted in that way. To feel like because of her it was taken away has been hard.
It's amazing what people will do when offered a huge amount of money. 50,000, 100,000 to hand over photographs, to create a story. And thank God most of them said no.
The week before our wedding, we get a call from our joint communications secretary. It said, this story is going to come out tomorrow saying that your father's been staging pictures and taking money from the press. And I was like, what kind of pictures?
They were relatively innocuous enough. You know, there was one of him looking at a book of the UK. I remember I naively went into the office and I said, isn't that sweet? Because I genuinely was in this sort of matrimony, love fest bubble, and a colleague sort of brought me down to earth fairly quickly and said, that's a setup.
That was the first I was hearing of it. And I remember Jason said, you just need to call him and find out if this is true or not, because it could be really damaging. H and I called my dad. I said, look, they're saying you're taking money from the tabloids to stage photos. Is this true? He goes, no. And on that call, I'd said to him, look, if this story, if they can't stop it, then it's gonna come out tomorrow. So why don't we send someone right now to your house to get you out of there now? Because if that's the case, your house will be swarmed by media. We'll get you out of there now. It's like, we'll just come and get you a day early. Let's get you out of Mexico. And he said, no, I have things I need to do. And it felt really cagey. I was like, it doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. And when we hung up, I looked at H. I was like, I don't know why, but I don't believe him.
The buzz this morning centers around Meghan Markle's father.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so there's a big irony in this one. We'll get to it. And at this point, I can't believe that the documentary makers aren't in on it. I really hope they are. She really. I think you're right, Scott, in that we've seen her performing a great deal. I think this is when Meghan really hits her maximum on this. I think this is outside of even her usual baseline of she's performing this one, because really pick up on that whispered dialogue that tries to create that intimacy of, here's the whispering that I had between myself and my husband to be. I think these elements are true, but even more extremely performed than they have been in the past. And so there's this idea of he stages pictures to control the narrative. He's been staging these pictures to control the narrative. Well, that's very similar as to what I've been seeing in this documentary, the staging of pictures to control the narrative. And so for me, it is amazing what people will do when offered a huge amount of money. Greg, what you got on this one?
Yeah, while she could be acting here, I think if she is, this is good acting because her timing and everything is good. First time I see something where her eyes are dropping down into her right and she's emotionally accessing. Look, even if you're acting, you have to do that. But I see that and I hear a slowing of cadence. And to your point, Mark, she whispers when she should whisper. She crosses her body in what I call the egg protector, where you're crossing primary sex organs, and then illustrates from there. Here's what I think. I think she believes what she's saying. Whether what she's saying is true or not, I can't tell. Because if you persuade yourself that, yes, in fact, it happened, you can make yourself believe it enough. And, in today's world of truth, where truth is a feeling more often than it's a fact, back to your point, Chase, about a lot of open-ended, no facts, no hard figures, nothing, just feelings, it gets much harder to figure out whether the person's telling the truth or not. There's probably a whole lot of deep-seated stuff going on under here because relationships between parents and children can be complex. Scott, what do you got?
All right, mine's going to be super short. I got 8 words. There's nothing new here for me. Everything is planned and bland. That's all I got. See, what do you got?
That's pretty good, and it rhymes. So right at the outset, the emotional accessing eye movement, which what we mean by that is somebody moves their eyes down and to their right like this, means they're accessing some emotional parts of the brain, memories, stuff like that. I'm paraphrasing the hell out of the actual research on that. But the hesitancy and the absolute loss of fluency at this little pause moment, I think, is two things happening simultaneously. Number one, she's pausing for effect for the story, which is acting big time. And two, she's processing the impact that the deception might have on her future, or in the future of this interview, at least. I won't claim to know what the concealed topic is here, but something is absolutely being hidden. I've passed probably the 30,000 hour mark on interviewing and doing this stuff a long time ago. And this is concealment. There is no, right at the no, we have lip retraction instantaneously. Then we see a postural bump. The entire posture goes up, all in this one little 1.5 seconds. Then there's a dominant shoulder retreat. She's right-handed. You see that little shoulder goes back. Then there's a deviation in eye accessing, which means her eyes are moving in multiple directions before she does anything else. Then we see a body movement freeze. The entire body freezes in place. You can watch this again. Take it down to slow motion. You're going to see every one of these behaviors I just told you in order in that slow motion. And she says, I don't know why, but I don't believe him. At that moment, right at the end of the video, we see a tongue jut. We see the tongue kind of come through the lips. You can look this up. All the people that have ever written about it, way smarter than I am. It typically denotes that somebody's getting away with something. It's typically when we see this most often. It's when someone feels like they're getting away with something. There's some distaste and disdain, but we see this tongue jut most often in research when somebody felt like they're getting away with something. Interesting point. I won't make any speculation here because everything is so vague, ambiguous, and lacking in any real stuff.
The eyewitness is you.
It's amazing what people will do when offered a huge amount of money. 50,000, 100,000 to hand over photographs, to create a story. And thank God most of them said no.
The week before our wedding, we get a call from our joint communications secretary. It said this story is going to come out tomorrow saying that your father's been staging pictures and taking money from the press. And I was like, what kind of pictures?
They were relatively innocuous enough. You know, there was one of him looking at a book of the UK. I remember I naively went into the office and I said, isn't that sweet? Because I genuinely was in this sort of matrimony, love fest bubble. And a colleague sort of brought me down to earth fairly quickly and said, that's a setup.
That was the first I was hearing of it. And I remember Jason said, you just need to call him and find out if this is true or not, because it could be really damaging.
H and I called my dad. I said, look, they're saying you're taking money from the tabloids to stage photos.
Is this true? He goes, no. And on that call, I'd said to him, look, if this story, if they can't stop it, then it's gonna come out tomorrow. So why don't we send someone right now to your house to get you out of there now? Because if that's the case, your house will be swarmed by media. We'll get you out of there now. It's like, we'll just come and get you a day early. Let's get you out of Mexico. And he said, no, I have things I need to do. And it felt really cagey. I was like, it doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. And when we hung up, I looked at H I was like, I don't know why, but I don't believe him.
The buzz this morning centers around Meghan Markle's father.
Certainly as a parent, it's not your, no, that's not what you do. Not parenting.
Paps and journalists and media were following him all day, every day. The unraveling happened that week when he wouldn't pick up my call. And instead you're talking to TMZ.
We just broke a big, fat story on our website. Meghan Markle was supposed to be walked down the aisle by her father, and we found out from her father, not only will he not do that, he's not going to attend the wedding at all.
And I'm finding out that you're not coming to our wedding through a tabloid.
Meghan's father, 73-year-old Thomas Markle, reportedly suffering a heart attack after igniting a scandal these past few days with staged paparazzi photos that went viral.
And then suddenly they were saying he was in the hospital. It's like, what's going on? Please just pick up the phone. Like, what's going on? We're not mad. Just please pick up the phone. Like,
he told me he had a heart attack 6 days ago.
Which is crazy.
Calling.
This is not him saying, oh, I don't want to be there.
No, I get it. I know what I'm saying.
And the world is watching this drama play out.
You feel so bad for everybody. Free Thomas Markle.
Free Thomas Markle, man. Tommy Marks, baby.
Mr. Markle, he didn't ask for this attention.
Even once it was said in the media, I just kept calling. We need to know what's going on. I don't understand what's going on. Are you okay? What hospital are you at? I mean, all of us. We're just trying to understand what was going on.
How you don't have your daddy at your wedding?
And then someone texted back on his phone. It was really weird. You know how people text, right? Like, you know, my dad used a lot of emojis and a lot of like ellipsis and ... and this was just the opposite. And it called me Megan. I was like, he's never called me Megan in any day that I've lived on this planet. Meg. All my friends call me Meg, and my parents call me Meg. And I was like, that's not my dad. So then we knew that his phone had been compromised. And we said, like, pick up the phone. We need to know it's you. Never spoke to him.
Of course, it's incredibly sad what happened. She had a father before this, and now she doesn't have a father. And I shouldered that, because if Meg wasn't with me, then her dad would still be her dad.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
I'm going to be short. She's barriered as she's telling this story. I mean, she's blocking you out. She's got stuff between you and her hands and doing that. When you bury her, when you cross over your torso, when you're telling a story and you haven't been doing it, why is my question. If she really wanted to know where her father was, I don't care what country he's in, I think the royals probably have resources enough to find him. Just guessing. I could probably find him myself with a telephone and her newfound Google skills. I would say there's likely a whole bunch of BS tied up in this whole thing, and there's some long-running baggage in the background, and maybe I'll just leave it at that. Chase, because I think you probably just hit on it just a minute ago in what he has never done. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, and one thing that really struck out to me here is she says, it called me Megan. It called me Megan, which is strange to refer to her dad that way. And right in this clip here. But this was the first time an actual accusation was even leveled, which implies to me that there's either deception or fear associated with leveling them elsewhere in this documentary. There's either deception or fear. I can't think of anything else. So it also shows us that they are both smart enough to know how to speak in factual language and that they know how to clearly state something that happened. Even if it's deception, they know how to level an accusation, which we expected to see probably for the last 95 hours. It feels like we've been watching this. Mark?
Yeah. So look, at every angle here, the media are manipulating to create drama. They're doing it in this documentary that we're watching. They did it by potentially taking control of somebody else's phone to create drama to respond to. Of course, the media do that, and if we think that they don't, we're utterly naive. And I don't think any of us watching this today are going to be that naive not to understand that everybody here is creating drama. What is an unfortunate drama, I think, here that Harry creates for himself is we know he already has this drama of Harry loses mothers and can't stop them dying, can't save them. He's now taken on, he loses other people's fathers as well. He's responsible for that as well. So it's an awful situation that just plays into this pattern of he has to be the person who loses parents and therefore has to be the person who will save himself from losing that parent, wherever he sublimates that figure into. But yet still other people around him have to lose their parents, and he must be responsible for that. And he isn't responsible for that. He has no responsibility for that, because if it's accurate that her father took money for a story, there's a simple solution to that, which is he didn't have to take the money. There isn't a circumstance where he has to take the money. If it were me and somebody came to me and said, hey, have 100,000 and we get to take control of your phone and we get to write whatever we like to your daughter at this really important point in their life, yeah, I'd be like, no. And they could go, well, you haven't got a lot of money. And I'd still be like, yeah, no. And I still won't have a lot of money because I'm not going to do that. I don't know whether he did that or didn't do that. But if he did do that and Harry's taking on that blame, that's nothing to do with being married to a royal. It's nothing to do with that. That's a father taking money for somebody else to control his daughter. If that's something that her father does, her father would have done that anyway for less money. If that's something the father does, the father would have been doing that already. I don't know whether he did that or not, by the way. But that, and I only highlight that because that's the nature of behavior. Behavior is the decisions that you decide to make. And that's drama. Drama is when there are multiple decisions in front of you and you get to be the person who decides on that. That's the moment of drama. That's the moment of character. We know who you are by the decisions that were put in front of you and the ones that you took. And if that's the decision that he took, it's not really about the amount of money. It's about the character of the person. Anyway, and the character, therefore, of that person and the media on every side of this is deception, deceit, and manipulation on every angle. So far, this is a deceptive and deceitful and manipulative story that we've all been watching from every angle so far. Scott, what do you got on this one?
You all have covered everything I was going to talk about, pretty much. I mean, Mark, you had a lot I didn't have, but the other stuff, to keep us from reiterating and re-going over everything, I'll just move on.
The eyewitness is you.
Certainly as a parent, it's not your, no, that's not what you do. Not parenting.
Paps and journalists and media were following him all day, every day. The unraveling happened that week when he wouldn't pick up my call. And instead you're talking to TMZ.
We just broke a big, fat story on our website. Meghan Markle was supposed to be walked down the aisle by her father, and we found out from her father, not only will he not do that, he's not going to attend the wedding at all.
And I'm finding out that you're not coming to our wedding through a tabloid.
Meghan's father, 73-year-old Thomas Markle, reportedly suffering a heart attack after igniting a scandal these past few days with staged paparazzi photos that went viral.
And then suddenly they were saying he was in the hospital. It's like, what's going on? Please just pick up the phone. Like, what's going on? We're not mad. Just please pick up the phone. Like,
He told me he had a heart attack 6 days ago.
Which is crazy.
calling.
This is not him saying, oh, I don't want to be there.
No, I get it. I know what I'm saying.
And the world is watching this drama play out.
You feel so bad for everybody. Free Thomas Markle.
Free Thomas Markle, man. Tommy Marks, baby.
Mr. Markle, he didn't ask for this attention.
Even once it was said in the media, I just kept calling. We need to know what's going on. I don't understand what's going on. Are you okay? What hospital are you at? I mean, all of us. We're just trying to understand what was going on.
How you don't have your daddy at your wedding?
And then someone texted back on his phone. It was really weird. You know how people text, right? Like, you know, my dad used a lot of emojis and a lot of like ellipsis and ... And this was just the opposite. And it called me Megan. I was like, he's never called me Megan in any day that I've lived on this planet. Meg. All my friends call me Meg, and my parents call me Meg. And I was like, that's not my dad. So then we knew that his phone had been compromised. And we said, like, pick up the phone. We need to know it's you. Never spoke to him.
Of course, it's incredibly sad what happened. She had a father before this, and now she doesn't have a father. And I shouldered that, because if Meg wasn't with me, then her dad would still be her dad.
All right, up to now, Mark, what's your analysis of what we've seen so far?
The whole thing is a masterful piece of propaganda and deception and deceit from every single angle. I'm excited to look at the second half of all of this, but do subscribe to tell us that you want to see that, because if you don't, we just won't. We'll know you're not bothered. Chase.
I don't want to analyze any of that, but I'll give you this analysis here. In almost every scene with the two of them in it, there's either contempt, shame, or a total lack of enjoyment when he is looking at her. I don't think he agrees with most of this, but I don't think he can speak up now that he's publicly done so much to commit. It's just hard to see any real emotion in here in this entire thing. And I think, one, because there's very little emotion in general because it's not there. Two, because the camera is on them only about 10% of the time. It's mostly just imagery, music, and editing just forced into your face, and just to kind of push a very, very specific narrative perspective there, which is why we don't see very much of them. We're seeing a lot of imagery and storytelling. Greg?
Yeah. Well, you have one thing to sell when you're a prince. I'm royal. Well, when you're not a prince, you used to be a prince. That's what you got to sell. So you got to rebrand it. And I always say the organism does what made the organism successful. She loves the camera. She's drawn to the camera. She goes at it at every turn. He abhors the media because he blames them for his mother. They now have to create some new creature, and they're creating this new thing with a whole bunch of new ways of talking, and they're less certain. I think you're right, Chase. He talks in feelings. He talks in open-ended things in a way that she does as well, and they have to rebrand. They create something new that they have to sell. You got to make a living, and leaving behind A duchy is a big deal. That's a big deal. That's money generating. So now you have a new way to make a living. I'm not beating him up for making a living, but he's going to have to change the way he thinks. She's going to have to change the way she thinks, and they're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And they are now, as I said in the beginning, number two. Number one is he's the fallen star child who can give us insight into the bad guys that are still on the cloud. And they are now the most important ex-royals there are. Scott, what do you got?
I think this is a great study in seeing how her body language and behavior is different, and his is different when they're not together. The difference in those things. When they're together, it's a completely different story and scene. And I think the only real emotion that we saw in this out of everybody so far, like I said before, was the niece. That's the only time we've seen actual true emotions come out. There's no acting in there. There's nothing fake about that. It's real. That's all real in there. And her father, I thought it was interesting in those pictures of him, how we see the same expression pretty much the whole time. It's a version of extra face where he knows that he's being watched, but he's trying not to. He's trying to act like he doesn't know it. Where with extra face, you're aware of it. So I think that the niece was my favorite part of this whole thing.
The behavior panel.
Did I ever tell you guys, and I'll take this out, about my story about Dr. Phil? When you said stories about even Dr. Phil, Greg, when I went to take a whiz at his office, we were at the house, and I was like, "Hey, can I take a whiz?" And he goes, "Yeah, just use the bathroom in there." And I go in the bathroom, and it's pretty big, it's pretty big. And I go in and I take a whiz, and then when I'm finished, I'm like, how do you flush this? And I look around and I'm down there thinking, I've got to flush this before I leave, but I can't find the thing to flush it with, right? So I'm down there on my knees trying to feel around and find where the flusher is. Maybe it's on the side. Maybe it's, some kind of thing. So then I got into a panic and I'm going, I think maybe it's voice activated. So I'm going, flush, I just didn't know what to do. The next thing I know, it flushed. So I don't know if it was something I did or something happens automatically or what, but it completely threw me. That's why that would be my Dr.
the idea
Phil
that it
story.
might be voice activated.
Yeah. Oh, that was the embarrassing part because I knew he could probably hear me because he's just right outside the door. I'm in there going, flush.
What's funny? Did you tell him?
No, I didn't tell. Oh,
man,
yeah,
he would have loved that.
I'll leave it in. He'll probably watch.
So what do you got?